Hello and welcome to a brand new edition of Smart Money. Since it's the beginning of the new financial year, we've decided to address a lot of the queries that we get from young earners, young investors on how to make smart financial decisions. And we've put together all of those queries. And today we're going to talk about that. Our expert today is Mrin Agarwal, who's a financial educator. She's a director at FinSafe India. And she deals with a lot of retail investors on a daily basis. Mrin, thanks a lot for joining in. And you know, we've got so many queries. We've decided to address all of that with you. So without wasting any time, let's first start with the tax regime, right? In the budget of 2023, the new tax regime has been made a default one. Now, all of us are struggling to understand whether I choose the new one, I choose the old one. How does one evaluate which one is better?
So good afternoon, Sonia, and thank you for having me on the Smart Money Show. Yes, this is something that everybody is grappling with today, whether to go for the new regime or the old regime. So first things first, the new regime is actually very simple because it only allows for a couple of deductions. The first one being the standard deduction and the second one being the NPS-CC D2 contribution, which means this is the employer contribution to NPS, right? It doesn't allow for any other deduction like, for example, ATC, ATD, ATE or the Section 24 benefit towards home loans that you have or the allowances. None of these are allowed as deduction in the new tax regime, right? So how do you figure out? Well, there is a calculator on the income tax website that you can actually use to figure out where you are paying a lower amount of tax. And as such, what I have seen is that in the cases where the deductions are above 3 lakhs and the incomes are also higher, I think the old regime is working out better. But essentially, you can find this out for yourself by using the calculator that's freely available on the income tax website.
So, just to make it a bit more simpler for our viewers, if you're someone who perhaps is paying house rent, has taken a home loan and you're paying EMI, so it's better to stick with the old tax regime, right? Or is it a possibility that I can perhaps switch between regimes as well?
Well, you can. And, while the new tax regime has been taken as the default regime in case of most employers, you have the ability to file your returns under the old tax regime. So as a salaried individual, you can switch between the regimes whenever you want to. So even if you declare new tax regime to your employer, you can still go ahead and file it in the old tax regime if you find that during the year you've made all of these contributions and the old regime is working out better. But remember, this is only for the salaried. For people who are in business income, they have the ability to switch only once and then they have to stay with that. Either way, what I would say is that do your research, figure out which regime you want to be in, because honestly, filing every year in a different regime is not going to be exactly very easy, and it's going to be quite cumbersome for you to, keep a track of everything, So I would say that, do your research, figure out the one that you want to go with, and then just stick with that.
But so someone who's watching us perhaps between the age of 20 and 30 has either taken a home loan, is paying an EMI, or someone who's perhaps paying house rent. Is it better to stick with the old regime because you get deductions there?
Yes, if your deductions are above 3.5 lakhs, then probably the old regime might work out better.
Okay, and what should one keep in mind as far as the new regime is concerned?
Well, a couple of things. You cannot file belated ITR in the new regime. So if you miss the deadline for filing ITR, which is July 31st, then you necessarily will have to file it under the old regime. The second thing is, of course, while the new regime gives you more cash at hand, you still do need to make all of those investments for your financial goals. And so, of course, you need to have a very good investment strategy, or you need to ensure that you're making those investments and really not using up that cash for lifestyle expenses.
Okay. In fact, since you talked about our financial strategy and investment strategy, many young earners that I interact with are very intimidated by this whole process of investment. They're not sure how to start investing, whether to buy stocks, whether to buy mutual funds, and within the funds, what to buy. So tell us, for all the people who've just started working, who've just accumulated some money, what's the best way to start investing?
Well, this is the most common question that I get. What's the best investment? And honestly, before you go towards that best investment, it's always important to be prepared for uncertainties. So if you don't have an emergency cash, then I think first you need to look at building that. That is typically 3 to 6 months of your expenses kept in fixed deposits. And of course, you need health covers because you could have a medical emergency anytime. And the best way to get it for the salaried is, of course, from your employer, because the employer cover comes at cheaper costs with lower waiting periods and lower exclusions as well. So, these are the first two things you need to do to prepare yourself against uncertainties. And then when you want to start investing, and I know that if you're a young earner today, you've just worked for a couple of years, and here I am telling you to save for retirement. But the only reason I'm telling you to do that first is because when you start early, it's easier for you to do it because the amount that you need to invest is going to be much lower. Most organizations offer a scheme called the National Pension Scheme. And this is a retirement scheme where the money is locked in till the age of 60. And at the age of 60, 60% comes tax-free and 40% goes into an annuity. Now, the good thing about NPS is firstly, it's deducted from your salary, right? If you sign up with your organization, that is. Secondly, it's extremely, extremely, extremely low cost. And you have the ability to choose the investment options, and you have equity options available as well. Now, because of the lock-in, and I know the lock-in sounds like terribly long, like next 30 years, but you know what? Honestly, the lock-in is what really helps in making those returns because the money is there, it's invested in equities and it's compounding and you don't have the ability to pull it out. So that's what actually really helps in building a very, very good corpus. It's tax efficient too. As I said, 80CCD2 deduction is available under the new tax regime as well and the old tax regime. So I think, to start off with, look at security and look at long-term security as well. And look at building that first before you really look at starting to invest.
Okay, very helpful, very, very helpful. In fact, for all of you young earners between the age of 20 and 30, this is how you start, right? First, you keep 3 to 6 months of, your salary aside so that you can build an emergency fund. So that's what you need to do first. After that, you need to look at insurance. A term insurance is the most helpful thing for you if you are a breadwinner of the family, if you have dependables. And the third thing you look at is the National Pension Scheme. Now, what we've decided to do here, and Amrin has very helpfully put together a table for us on how the National Pension Scheme compares to equity mutual funds and what is a 5-year and a 7-year return that you can get. So if you look at it, the tier 1 plans in equity, there's about a 13% return in 7 years. In government bonds, there's 8.5%, and in corporate debt, about 8%. So tell us, Amrin, how does the NPS compare to equity mutual funds? We'll, of course, get to mutual funds and the contribution you need to make later. But on NPS versus mutual funds, anything you want to mention?
Yeah, so actually, I just want to say that on the equity returns that I have shown, this is an average of all the equity pension funds, like all the pension funds, the active equity options. I've just taken an average of that and, given out these particular figures. So, honestly, I think, returns apart, I think when we are evaluating the NPS versus an equity fund, because clearly today, if you have a 25, 30-year horizon, both are options for you to invest in. Now, the difference really is that on the equity side, of course, there's more flexibility because there's no lock-in. And I think it's pretty low cost as well. But of course, NPS is much lower cost. So I think, the big difference is, do you want to manage this investment yourself and have more flexibility and liquidity? Or, if you find it very difficult to figure out which equity fund do I want to get into, you have this product that's available. And of course, the other point that one has to think about also is that it's going to give you a fixed return after retirement as well, right? So I think it's really a difference of where you are more comfortable. Are you more comfortable figuring out things yourself and having more flexibility? Or if you feel that it's okay, let me just log this in because it'll get taken care of and I'll get a pension and it's tax efficient anyway. So again, it really boils down to your comfort factor.
Okay, and that's also a really helpful table, right? We just get that up on the screen. The difference between investing in a national pension scheme and investing in mutual funds, both large and mid-cap. Here you have it, very helpful. For 10 years, if you invest in the national pension scheme, on an average, you can get about a 12-13% return. In equity mutual funds, of course, if you higher risk is higher return. So in the mid-cap space, there's higher risk, and you can make about 17%. These are just on an average. It may not hold true in the next 10 years. But large cap returns are about 12%. In any case, by investing in these products, you are beating inflation. So that's what you've got to start doing immediately. Let's talk a little bit about within the equity mutual fund space, right, Mrin? There are so many different categories of funds. Which ones are you recommending and why?
So actually the returns that I have actually mentioned over there, these are past returns. And as you mentioned that, these may not play out in the future. So certainly, when you are looking at investing, don't go by these returns. I mean, this was just to give you an idea of what's happened in the past. And as we all know, the disclaimer that past returns are not indicative of the future returns. So do keep that in mind. Now, within the equity space, there are, of course, so many different categories of funds that are available. And it gets a little difficult for people to figure out as to where to put, where to invest. And especially what happens is that most people go by the near-term performance of funds and choose funds based on that. Ideally, you need to always be well diversified within the equity space in large, mid, and small cap stocks. And a good way to do this would be through a combination of a couple of categories, like, for example, index funds. So you can have a Nifty 50 index fund, which will give you exposure to large cap stocks. You can have a mid cap fund. And I think, while the actively managed mid cap funds, there are a couple of funds which are consistent outperformers. And I would actually highly recommend an actively managed mid cap fund. At the same time, I will also manage an actively managed flexi cap fund as well, because in the flexi cap, you're getting exposure to large, mid, small cap. And of course, there are a few funds which also give you international stock exposure within the flexi cap funds. So I would say a combination of the index fund, the actively managed flexi cap fund, and the actively managed mid cap is all that you actually need in the portfolio. Now, there are many other categories available, for example, sector funds, thematic funds. There are many other categories that are available. I don't recommend these funds because they tend to be too concentrated, and these themes may or may not play out. Plus, the high conviction bets of all of these would anyway be present in the flexi cap fund. So you don't need to take concentrated bets. So I would say an index, a flexi cap, and a mid cap. This is all that you need to actually really start off your investment journey.
Okay, these are some pearls of wisdom coming in from Mrin. Thanks a lot. We'll slip into a short break, but I do want to ask you about, some of these products which are fancied lately, whether it is PMSs or even in the F&O space, lots of products. I'll come back in just a bit to answer all of your queries. Stay tuned.